Hello YouTube, this is Matt Pullen, and today I'm going to bring you a very basic lesson in Rook versus Pawn endgames. This is an endgame study which I composed. It's not very deep, but it shows the center concept that I want to get across, which is that Rook versus Pawn endgames, like most endgames, are decided by king position. So it's black to play and draw. The pawn is moving down. Queening square is on c1. And the white rook is behind the pawn on c8. White king is very far away. So if we look at the square of the pawn, which is often useful in endgames involving a pawn, we see that the white king is way outside of it. However, the square of the pawn is not so important here because this pawn is not a runner, is more like a toddler who needs his father's hand to take a step. In this case, the black king needs to advance before the pawn can advance, since if black just played c3, then white would take it with his rook. So, bearing that in mind, how many moves will it take black to support a queen? First, he must advance his king, so that's 1, and the pawn, so that's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It takes black 6 moves to support a queen. Now, how many moves does it take white to contest the queening square? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it takes white 5 moves to get there, and black 6 moves to support a queen. So that suggests that even though it's black to move, 6 versus 5, black is short a tempo, he's going to lose. However, if black knows the appropriate strategy, then even in this endgame, he can get a draw. Let's look at what happens if white advances with his king and black tries the most obvious way to advance the pawn. So king b4, that move is kind of forced, and then king g6, and now if black plays c3, again pushing the pawn forward as quick as possible, but this is not the right strategy, and we'll see that black will lose. After king f5, king b3, king e4, c2, and now it's white's move, and white plays king to d3. And here the pawn is not ready to advance yet to the queening square, but the white king and the rook are double teaming the black pawn, so black will lose. White will go on to checkmate with king and rook versus lone king. So let's go back. In this position, after white has played king g6, we saw that in the previous sequence, black lost because white's king was on the opposite side of the pawn as black's king, and the kings both got there at the same time, yet the white king and rook were able to win the pawn. Well, the key concept here and the drawing move is to play king c3. And if you've studied other endgames that involve pawn races, this seems counterintuitive. Why block your own pawn? The answer is that black is doing a crossover maneuver. He's going to cross over his king in front of the pawn, and by doing so, he's going to shoulder out the white king when it gets to f5, so the white king will not be able to get any closer to the black pawn. For instance, king f5, king d3, and now we see that the white king can't approach the black pawn because black is shouldering off the white king. So if white tries to go around the long way, then we will see that to contest the queening square, we will see this will be too slow. Like king f4, and now black just pushes the pawn c3, king f3, c2, king f2. And now if white had one more move, he could play king e1. And with the white king on e1, black would be in the Zugzwang. He'd have to move his rook away. I mean, he'd have to move his king away and lose the pawn to the white rook. But it's black's move, and he plays king d2. And this threatens the queen, and the white king can do nothing. So black gets a draw. Let's look at another attempt. Instead of king f4, what if white plays rook d8, gets black in check? What's the right king move here? Well, if black plays king e3, it's an easy draw. Remember, the key thing in rook versus pawn for the inferior side needs to keep the other king out. So this keeps the white king out, and it allows for the advance of the pawn. The black pawn can advance freely now that there's no longer a rook behind it. So after white plays like rook c8 to get behind the pawn, he has nothing better. Then black just repeats position with king d3. So in summary, in this position, if black rushes straight ahead for the to make the queen, then the white king will get there at the same time, and black will lose. But if black takes the time to cross over the pawn to prevent the white king from attacking the queening square, then black can secure the draw. So what happens if white moves first here? Well, if king g6, king b4, king f5, now this same idea, crossing over in front of the pawn, is not going to work here, because king c3, white just plays king e4, and black cannot keep the white king out. In fact, the white king will move next to d4, and then the pawn will come under attack. So instead of king c3, if black just tries to promote the pawn straight away, then white will be much too fast. This pawn will drop next move. So let's go back to this other variation. After rook d8 check, what if black moves in front of his pawn, king c2? This is counterintuitive because it gives up all the progress black had made with his crossover maneuver to keep the king out. See, here white can approach with his king, and black will just have to lose tempo because he's blocking his pawn. So king e4, c3, and now white plays king e3, and the next move white will make will be king to d3. So black is in Zugzwang. He can't prevent white's king from getting into d3. So the game would end something like king b1, king d3, c2. Black is threatening the queen, but white can play rook b8 check. And the only move not to just lose the pawn next turn is to play king c1. But then rook c8, and the black pawn will fall. So in summary, the key to this study is that the inferior side, the side with the pawn, wants to get his king on the same side of the pawn as the opponent, so as to cut the opponent's king from coming underneath the pawn. Well, I hope you learned something if you didn't know anything at all about this particular type of endgame. And I think that my next video will be a more complicated rook versus pawn study by Richard Reddy, in which case you will need to understand the basics behind this type of ending to appreciate that study. Well, I will talk to you next time. Bye.